inclusive system on peace and security. But I won't talk about all of that. But then there's management too, and management is the reforms in the UN itself, just to try to streamline. And then specifically at country level, we are looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, which every single member state has, signed to, that 2030 would have reached the goals. But we know that's not going to happen, because recently there was, a review of how far progress has been, and we're badly behind with our reaching the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is because of COVID, this is because of all the other polycrises that are happening in the world. So even when it comes to SDG number 10, which is on reducing inequality, that's a challenge. And a challenge not only globally, but a challenge also in Namibia as well. And now when you ask then what we do at the country level in order to be able to try to address issues of inequality, here in Namibia, we do have a program. And it's called the United Nations Partnership Framework. And it's a 4-year, and we align it to NDP 5, we've aligned it to Harambee Prosperity Plan, Vision 2030. And we are saying within that framework, we are looking at issues of economic progression, the whole issues of unemployment, which of course exacerbate issues around inequalities. We are looking at issues of also social transformation. We're talking health, we're talking education, social protection, gender equality. Recognizing that these are all, elements which will promote inequalities if we do not look at them as the UN. Environmental sustainability, droughts, we are talking of the floods. How again are we addressing that? And through our partnership framework, this is what we are trying to do as well. And lastly, good governance. We are looking at the issues around data. We've talked a lot about data, the research, statistics, but the point is that if we are using outdated data, that's going to not also help us in terms of our interventions. Interventions being policies and programs. So UN is looking at issues from that broad perspective, but we obviously are not, we are going to provide technical capacities in terms of how do we help the government in terms of the policies, right? How are we helping to in terms of knowledge, sharing knowledge, because yes, we are not going to pull things from other countries, but what can we learn from other countries which we can adapt to the Namibian context? We are looking at also how do we train, how do we build people in various institutions, not just government, but also civil society. So there's a whole spectrum of things that we are doing. Could we do it better? Yes, for sure. And so I think the point is, yes, we've been around, but the issue then is that, are we making that impact? Are we having that dent? And I think this is the point then that we need to work with other partners, because we can't do it on our own. We have to work with governments, we have to work with development partners, we have to work with civil society, we have to work with the entire spectrum of the population. Yes. But at the end of the day, we are led by what the country is wanting for the betterment of the people of Namibia, because it was said by previous speakers that I think putting the human being at the center is what is critical. We can't just have all these policies which are not talking to the real issues of people.
Thank you very much. So the question here is, how does South Africa reduces inequality, and is there something from South Africa that we can learn in Namibia as well?
Yes, that's a very difficult question, especially when the Gini coefficient has moved. So probably the exam paper that I have about WAM, I prepared for an elephant. So the only bridge I'd have to use is that the worm has it's elongated like the trunk of an elephant. So I cannot answer the question of inequality because it continues. In fact, it is getting worse. However, since 2001, to try and deal with these issues of poverty, because inequality and poverty are related, South Africa introduced a range of measures, particularly to look at the plight of the poor. In terms of access to water, potable water, 6 kiloliter free basic water per household per month, 50 kilowatts free basic electricity per household per month, on sewerage 50 rands per month, and then 50 rands for solid waste, as interventions that were introduced to mitigate not so much inequality, but poverty. And you can see in the results, in the statistics, that inequality, the Gini has remained where it is. But when you look at the impact of that on poverty, particularly between 2001 and 2011, you see a rapid reduction of poverty in all the municipalities in South Africa, 252 of them, especially if you look at that from the multidimensional point of view. But you also see serious reversal from 2011 to 2016, whereby of the 252 municipalities, 82 of them have reversed. So the question is, what happened between then and you can see that actually continuing to reverse, because even between 2018 and 2019, the number of households that were accessing these basic guaranteed rights have actually decreased significantly since that time. In the meantime, the Statistician General, my successor, of course, we issued, when I was there, we issued inflation-adjusted poverty lines to which the government has to live up to by providing the kinds of interventions such as social grants that are inflation-adjusted to those. And as we speak now in 2022, those lines for the food poverty line, that's about 500 rands, and for the lower bound poverty line, that comes to about 700 rands, and for the upper bound, it's about 1,400. So will government live up to that? It's yet to be seen. If it doesn't, it means that the living conditions will actually decline. So basically, we bring the data and bring those together with policy to see whether the interventions will actually materialize. Well, we've had COVID, we've had a lot of other things in South Africa. The High Commissioner knows all these difficulties. Certainly, the living conditions in South Africa are deteriorating very, 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 very fast. So, what could be the bigger question? I think the bigger question is in the space of our policy designs, is how in the design of policy we are systematic. It's not so much about, yes, the statistics are important, but adopting a very systematic process around design is very, very crucial. And I think that's where we fail. Yes, we have South Africa 2030, Vision 2030. We have all these countries saying we have this vision, that vision. But these are nice words, unfortunately. Until you define those nice words in terms of policies, until you define those scenarios into the future in the form of what are the set of policies that define these particular scenarios. Because a high road scenario, a middle road scenario, and a low road scenario, each one of them have specific policies. And you can only become intentional when you quantify those scenarios following the laws of motion of economics. And that is where the eye of the needle functions well. And you will make your choices for that. And therefore, what am I saying? Might mean that you must have scenarios. You must then define those scenarios in terms of a set of policies. You must then quantify those policies so that the critical choices can be made. And then manage, communicate, and everything. We only stop at the nice words of the scenarios. Waragwara, it's Naina walk, and all that. We don't go beyond that. And therefore, when we do that, we can't expect a difference. And we try to mix these policies together and think that we can average them out and achieve something. So that's where I think I've observed a major weakness sitting there as a statistician, and that's why we actually established this Economic Modeling Academy to try and bring to bear the idea of setting scenarios that are quantified, modeled, looked into the future in order to resolve problems.
Thank you.
I want to take this opportunity first, before I tell you what is happening in Kenya, to thank Dr. Kasela for an excellent paper which has set this ground, and also the excellent questions that came after that paper. I felt that we were suited and that we will be able to discuss this very, very complicated topic of inequality, poverty. It has many, many synonyms, but we choose to use these two. We are looking at inequality, both within countries and between countries. And we realize it is a big, big conversation that requires a lot of time, that requires a lot of analysis to be able to discern what is right. Because really, I don't think, as long as no one tells us that one size fits all, we can be able to get the policy interventions that we are getting and trying to ensure that our countries are able to tackle the issues of inequality and poverty, which are very related. Now, in Kenya, if I can go straight to Kenya, okay, I'm here to look at the strategic initiatives or strategies that can help the inequality, the reduction of inequality in the work that is being done in different countries. But in Kenya, we have been able to put in, we are not any different. When you look at the African countries and break it down to sub-Saharan African countries, we struggle with the same issues, very clear, inequality, poverty issues, the issue of politics, which I believe there is a very, very interesting relationship between democracies and these inequalities and the poverty issues. The relationship there is, I don't know, maybe we would ask John Stedler to define it, but you will find that in most cases, politics is superior to anything any country is trying to do. The set of politicians you have in a country determines how that country was. So, and we the citizens are the ones who elected them, because we elected them in Kenya every 5 years. In other countries, almost similar. Now, inequality reduction strategies in Kenya have taken very clear positions. Our new constitution is not very new. It was established in 2010, and basically we have introduced devolved units, meaning that we have 47 governments, including the national, 47 government and one national government. You can imagine, you can start imagining what that does to a country. And we are now in the middle of that implementation, and I need 2 days to explain you what we have gone through. But the system decentralizes both the power and resources, empowering local communities to be able to manage their agenda and come up with what they think is their priorities. It has also managed basically to address regional disparities because the resources come, they collect their own revenues within the counties and then they are given money from the national government. We have also introduced some time back free primary education. The last presidents were very, very dynamic and they were able to expand education very widely within Kenya. And they introduced free primary education, so nobody in Kenya can say that they can't go to school because at least up to the end of primary. It is, I think, very similar to Namibia. Now, when you look at the tertiary education, that is where we are struggling with because recently we came up with a competence-based education system. We are trying to do away with a system that Kenyan children, Kenyan parents, the Kenyan society was very comfortable with, the 844. It was heavy in curriculum, but we realize now that the one we are going to is even more detailed and we need a lot of policy formulation to be able to implement it. But that's what we are starting to implement. We also have, we came up, and this is something, in fact, after listening to Dr. Kasera, I was wondering how come we have not put centrally on the table the issue of inequality in healthcare delivery. Because that is where I think there is a problem across Africa. You find that if you are not on an insurance, you will actually die. So those are issues that we are troubling to. There is very severe inequality on healthcare in most of our countries. So in Kenya, we have put a lot of interventions. We even, the first lady of the last government came up with a Beyond Zero campaign where she was providing remote clinics to very remote areas where she was singing the song of every child in Kenya must be born in a clean environment, in a clean environment where there are doctors and nurses. And she almost achieved at least something there, although I can't be able to quantify for you right now. I am not able to give you any statistics on that. Gender policies, you know what it is in Kenya. We have not done very well. We have not achieved the 3/3 majority of women. And as a matter of fact, as we were talking about these inequalities in gender and politics especially, I would like to comment on that, where the ground does not allow all of us, gender. Gender is a very difficult subject, but the political ground does not allow all of them to have the same footing. So you will find like in Kenya, we have not been able absolutely to achieve the 3/3 majority of getting most of the leaders into parliament, into the two August houses, into parliament. They have tried to do the affirmative action where they say, let's say, nominate some of the ladies into the women into parliament. But you know, that doesn't even start to scratch the ground because you wonder, I'm a human being, I have the brain. I can think, I've gone to school, why do you want to nominate me? Give me the ground and I will fight to be elected like all of you. So there is all that we are dealing with. So affirmative action policies are in place in Kenya. And these policies, you know, we have reached about 30% of the government in procurement, where we have a lot of procurement opportunities being given to women, disabled people, and the youth. And so youth policies are also in that sense developed and being implemented. We have what we call Vision 2030, which is very clear. When it was designed and put in place, the Kenyan government and the Kenyan people were very excited. There were a number of project programs out of there, and I can share here that most of the infrastructure flagship are up and running. We have Nairobi is a bit different. Even me, I find it very difficult to drive in Nairobi now because the roads have all gone. So we are very, very clear. The airport has received a lot of revamping and all that. So we have that Vision 2030 being implemented, and it's being taken very, 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 very seriously. We had the railway, the standard gauge, that is a major one that was implemented. We have the RAP set, the RAM, that is, we are trying to join the corridor in terms of infrastructure between Kenya and the other countries that are on the other side, Somalia, Ethiopia, and all that. Then we have the Concert City, where we are talking about having a Silicon City of IT, and this is where we are critically thinking about in what do you call it? This intelligence, the artificial intelligence, which is now running. You know, when you look at the entire question of technology, that is where Kenya is thinking we should be able to start putting artificial intelligence as an area of technology that we must take forward. So that is ongoing. We have the national insurance, the National Hospital Insurance Fund, which is also being implemented. So we can say that the health sector is being covered in terms of under this Vision 2030. We can say the education system, the green energy projects are ongoing, and we have the Chitamo. We have all of the energy sector being revamped through this Vision 2030. Now, having said that, I would like to underscore the fact that politics becomes more superior to very clear interventions that the government has been able to put together to take the country forward. Why do I say this? We have just come out of elections, and right now when you get into Kenya, the fight is what is the opposition saying? What does the opposition, want? You would hear stories about you didn't win, you are not legitimate, and so forth. So that is where we are right now. Nobody's remembering there were policies to be implemented. We are right now trying to see whether we are legitimate in office and so forth. Otherwise, the Kenyan government is trying its best. The Kenyan people are aware, and we are doing our best. Thank you very much.
Is the United Nations really an independent institution, an institutional framework which is not influenced by the different polars in the world? And if it is dependent, to what extent and how does that influence from the different polars influence the decisions that the institutions make? And when we speak about sovereignty, what does sovereignty imply if other countries like the greatest powers have influence over decisions that are taken by like African countries in the context of like Uganda? Thank you.
In Namibia, we have what we call the phenomenon of the working poor. How can we go about introducing a minimum wage to counter inequality? Sometimes you are entering an entry-level job. You are coming from university, you are offered a salary of 5,000. That doesn't even count, it doesn't cover rent. Then we have to talk about food, we have to talk about transport. So sometimes we are talking about, yes, creating employment, but how do we ensure that the employed don't become part of the working poor? And I want
There is a situation, anyone can take that, the panelist. There's a situation that is seriously challenging the norms of governance in French West Africa, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and all that. Usually the African Union and everybody, according to the framework, the AU has, which is a general principle, a general norm that we don't recognize the unconstitutional changes of government. So when that happens, we immediately impose sanction, we immediately, if necessary, we go and intervene. What actually happened in French West Africa is that the masses of the population are supporting these military leaders. So who are you going to intervene and save? One of the president who has removed you is calling the Europeans, please reinstate me. It's not calling their own people to do that. And other countries are saying, we are part of ECOWAS, but we're not going to war. We're not intervening anyway. In other countries, there's never happened in Africa where, if it's Madagascar does it, the whole SADC suspends them until they return to constitutional order. But these other ones are also saying, now, if anybody that touches Niger, you have declared war on Mali. And Guinea is saying the same, completely unheard of. And what do you then do? Would you intervene as an AU when the masses are saying, we are done with these sellouts, viva the revolution? So I'm interested in hearing your view about that.
Thank you.
Now, you talked about artificial intelligence replacing human capital. This is a technology front that everyone must move to. And it doesn't mean that it will remove the human capital, but we have to, in fact, I just want to ask a question before I can answer you. We have youths here. Have you heard of GPT?
Yes.
You have heard of GPT, which is a sibling of it's a sibling of something else. Chat GTP and another one, Instruct GTP. I come from academia now. I'm teaching in a university, and we are watching and struggling with the students giving a prompt. This Chat GTP is trained to follow an instruction to a prompt. In other words, you can tell it, Chat GTP, give me a 300 abstract on this topic. As long as you define it properly, in 10 minutes you have your 300. That is artificial intelligence. So we can't stop it. The best we can do is join. And then find methods of how we can stop it. I mean, we can manage it. We can manage it. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is Kenya is a tea producing country, and our tea is very good. It is normally blending other teas from other countries. If you go to the Kericho area, one region, they have mechanized it. We used to have a lot of labor, people blacking tea, but now the machines black that tea. There are riots, there are all sorts of politicians pushing the multinationals to move out, but that is not going to happen. The Kenyan government has decided that we move technologically. So, to answer your question, we are going to go to the technology and later find methods of managing the human capital or making sure that the two go together. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And the UN is made up of member states. So member states contribute. Namibia contributes a certain amount, but of course, like the industrialized countries would probably put more money. So at the end of the day, they are the ones who will probably, get some of the powers to, move decisions, right? But as I mentioned, is that like when you look at the whole UN system, the recognition is there by the Secretary General and member states that, the inequalities in the system exist. And how can we reform those? Even now, the discussion too is about the financial institutions, the international financial institutions, how they should also probably be reformed to be more relevant to what's happening to today. So the system is an old system, but the point is that it's trying to reform it, which is going to take time. But don't forget that at the end of the day, it's the member states which make the decisions. Geopolitics, that's there. Yeah, and I think we are battling with it, even with I think Dr. Job's question to the West African, French West African countries. It's about geopolitics if you begin to unpack it. So the point is that I think this is the struggle we have, and I think then it goes back to questions which were, I think the point which Dr. Kasera mentioned is the leadership of the continent. What do we want for Africa? And how is it then that we can make Africa a better place? My neighbor here, I think, spoke about also too the policies that we are making in the country. Are these just words, or we are actually trying to make a difference? And sometimes making a difference means making those hard decisions, which are going to pinch, etc. So I think it's a whole big animal, which I think just needs to be,
managed.
Managed and unpacked and whatever else. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you. Dr. Pali, there was a question on the working poor. Are we creating working poor, or what is it that we're doing?
Well, answering that question is very difficult. And it goes back to the creation of the United Nations system in 1945 and the associated institutions of the IMF and the World Bank. And if you think about the history there, Maynard Keynes was supposed to be in that discussion. He was not able to. Instead, there are others who were in there who actually embedded a particular policy position towards what should happen post 1945. And since then, we've seen, of course, the Cold War came about, and 1988-89, a unipolar world emerged with the dismantling of Russia and so on. And if you think about that time, South Africa also managed to be free because, in part, because a unipolar world had emerged. With it emerged specific policies that were largely driven by their intellectual behind them, Milton Friedman. And in this, he generally created free market fundamentalism, which is actually what we have followed with structural reforms. And if you think about the Lagos Plan of Action, it was actually fighting these structural reforms that were actually announced before 1979, thereabout, which introduced things like user pay in education and so on. And since then, the African education system got broken. So the creation of the working poor has come about through that entire process. If you think about Milton Friedman going to Russia, talking to Gorbachev, and Russia reversed its progress in education and other things. It's only regaining itself now. He tried to go to China, and Deng was almost biting that bait. But he said, no, China has always had its own markets. And the markets in China are about using that which is heavy to shoot at that which is light. And an ever normal grammar, which was a philosophy of Qing dynasty, 5000 BC. And when you see the path China has followed, has been that one of actually getting a particular market system with China's characteristics. The rest of us in South Africa, we followed a different path.
Economists.
Yes. And the economists have said this, the hidden hand of the market, which determines, yes. So this is the problem that we have in Africa, of this particular invisible hand. And Greenspan when we had the IMF at a conference, was saying, he made a mistake. He had retired by that time from as the banker of the US, that he thought, reflecting on the 2008 financial crisis, he thought the free market will ensure that the bad loans will actually go to the wall and the good loans will survive. No, the investment bankers mix both the bad and the good and plunge the world into that kind. So when we think about this free market and that it is free, this is where the politics have power, but then they exercise that power very wrongly. Human agency is at the center of change. And free markets, do they? I don't think they do. And they've landed us here, where you find that we have created the waging pool.
Yeah.
It's an intentional creation.
Definitely food for thought. So the last question was about governance in West Africa, in the former French colonies, and the unconstitutional changes of governments there, and then interventions from outside. The question was open to all of you. So I don't know, Professor Gesami, do you want to answer it since you're dealing with policy, or Dr. Hopolang, do you want to answer that? You already said it's geopolitics. That's your answer. All right.
Yes, I think the popular revolt in West Africa has been well documented over time. That it is boiling over now. It's a Sankara moment having come to maturity. And certainly it is creating this conundrum that the African leaders agreed to, that military coups are not allowed on the continent once people have been elected correctly, then there shouldn't be military coups. I think there's a prior question to that what does it mean? What does this democracy mean? And Professor Weiwei, the Chinese ambassador, who would say that in China you have to have plan a municipality with 100 million people before you rise through power. I think the central question is, what is the meaning of democracy? And if you read Socrates and Confucius argue about meritocracy, that Socrates says he believes in democracy, but not the type of democracy where everybody can vote. Why would you allow yourself, if you have to go to a surgeon to operate on your brain, it will not be anybody who does that. Why do you leave an important issue of democracy, of politics, to anybody to operate on your bodies? Like, would you allow anybody that comes across you and you allow them to operate on your brain? And you are saying democracy works like anybody operating on your brain. And we have allowed it. And that's what Socrates was saying. He was not against people voting, but he was against those who do not have the ability and the higher level of social consciousness to actually lead or even vote, because this corresponds with Lenin in 1920 when he was addressing the Bolsheviks. He said there are three things that we have in the Russian Revolution, and those are the enemies. Communist pomposity within which communists articulate the slogans, that was what he was against. Illiteracy, that a person who is illiterate lives out of politics. And corruption. And those three things are things that are facing us today. And he was arguing that anybody who has to participate in a democratic process has to have a higher cultural conscience. And therefore, it is that which Socrates was arguing about. It is that which Confucius was arguing about. And in fact, it's probably what the Chinese mean by saying selection and election as a process of getting democracy going. So you select the best. So that, I think, this is the problem we are in at the moment.
With an unconstitutional treaties.
Thank you. I think that was a very good question, which is very deep and which is very complicated. As we indicated earlier, democracy, there is very complicated relations between democracies and other variables, so to speak, be it inequality, be it management or the pro-poor policies that we put in place. Politics is complicated. Now, perhaps I can say this because we are in a university ground. Now, when you look at the history, sometimes I sit and I wonder, why did we have colonialism? Why? Why did we have apartheid, for example? And those are questions that for me have never been answered. Now, to answer the question very vaguely, those who suffered colonization, being colonized, Kenya was part of it, and many other countries. And it was that period, long time ago, it was the scramble for Africa. And the scramble for Africa is like you put the map on the table and you say, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine, and then the power is done. It didn't mean perhaps that the Africans had their own way, but that is what happened. Now, for the West Africans, they were unfortunate because the French people colonized them in another way, while those who were colonized by the Anglophone, that's the English speaking, had it a little softer because we had telephone lines ending in our country. But those who were colonized by the French, that call you made from, say, Mali or wherever else, will go to France first before it comes to Mali. So these different types of, being colonized were a bit difficult, and we have lived with it. It is our parents suffered most. Our great parents suffered worse than we would ever suffer. But it is something we need to always keep in our minds and to always teach our new generation that this was a painful experience that we went through, but it made us stronger. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I think my question goes to Dr. Pali. My question is, in statistics, are there indicators that link corruption, corruption and inequality? Because we all know on the continent, and not only in African continent, but also in developed countries, corruption is it's big. And I also sometimes feel like our corrupt leaders maybe do not know the impact and the magnitude of their actions on the citizens, like ordinary citizens. So are there any indicators that have a direct link, corruption and inequality? And if there aren't, can't we create any, because we need them? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman over here.
Good evening, Amanda. My question also aligns with his. The issue of inequality, the elements of accountability, corruption, and resource management were not properly, my sound is going down, were not properly outlined. So that is a major cause of anyways inequality and poverty, all of those things. Is that we are wealthy countries, even wealthier than the West, but the mismanagement of resources, misappropriation of policies is what puts us here. So those things will not come throughout these sessions. If I missed, I don't know. So how then do we control corruption, mismanagement, unaccountable people or those who are in power if they can manipulate policies and systems and get away with more resources than due to them? So how is that now intervened? So that is my question.
If you think about thinking plan, it's basically thinking ahead. And thinking ahead means you have to assemble all kinds of thoughts and model that future. And the history of modeling has been probably driven by things you can quantify. And modeling in the area of development has been concentrated on the economic side. So econometrics has been a fairly well developed science, and it deals with those things that economically you can count. So the CGE model is basically that. So you look at where will your GDP be, where will your debt to GDP ratio be, where will your growth will be. So prices and growth and all those are concentrated on the CGE. The key issues that we are facing are not in that model, like unemployment, poverty, and inequality. To impute those, you run small studies that are not integrated in that model. So when you run that model, it cannot tell you the impact on employment, impact on inequality, and impact on all these things that we are talking about. So you are facing a Mulana situation where Mulana was walking around and the friend asks him, Mulana, what's the problem? Mulana tells him, I lost my coin. So he asks, Mulana, where did you lose your coin? He says, I don't know. If I knew, I would have gone there. Then he asks him, why are you looking for it here? He says, that's where there is light. So econometrics is based on knowledge systems. And it's not outside. The things that are outside, such as poverty, corruption, and so on, are not easy to quantify. Now, Friedman and them created the basis for the CGE model, which measures economics in terms of what I've spoken about, growth, which was the main thing, because the GDP, national account, was a product of the end of the World War, and the world wanted to understand the macroeconomic imbalances so that the war can be stopped. Because both the First and the Second World War were a result of the macroeconomic imbalances. So GDP, the first commission that was established by the United Nations, one of the two was the Statistics Commission, and central to that was the national account. So the national account has been at the forefront of the statistics system at the UN, not focusing on the main things like poverty, inequality, and so on. So now there are models that are built that actually show the impact of macroeconomic policies on poverty, inequality, and multidimensional poverty. So those must be the objective outcomes against which then we can actually say, well, how do these get affected by the macroeconomic policies? That is there. There was a study more recently where at the BRICS summit 3 weeks ago, where they actually looked at what corruption, but unfortunately, corruption indicators have not become part of the rubric of statistics in statistics organizations. But they use Corruption Watch to regress that and find what actually happens to corruption. And the results are quite promising. That where there is less corruption, results are much, much better. And we compare different countries, South Africa, China, Brazil, and so on. And the results are quite good. Thanks.